Welcome to the Blue Check Shops interview series powered by Technician Find. What if I told you right now there are shop owners just like you who have completely freed themselves from the daily grind? They're not stuck putting out fires, managing drama between the front of the house and the back of the house, or worrying about their shop falling apart when they take a vacation. Instead, they're taking extended time off, pursuing their passions, and watching their profits grow. All because they discovered something that Fortune 500 companies have known for decades about building high performance teams. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this proven system that's transforming independent auto repair shops across the country. Whether you're working 80-hour weeks and dreaming of freedom, or you're already successful but you want to take your team to the next level, you'll want to stay tuned because in the next 30 minutes, we're going to show you exactly how to build a self-managing team that runs your shop better than you do. Today, I have Howard Guttman and Shawn Gilfillan with me. Howard M. Guttman is a world-renowned consultant and author who is known for his work with Fortune 500 corporations. He specializes in aligning senior management teams and developing horizontal organizations through his firm Guttman Development Strategies. He has authored 3 acclaimed business books, including Great Business Teams, Cracking the Code for Standout Performance. And he's also been widely published in prestigious outlets like Harvard Business Review and Time Magazine. Shawn Gilfillan owns Automotive Magic and Magic Lube and Rubber in New Jersey. He co-founded the Shop Management Alliance and is the owner and founder of Magical Solutions LLC, where he leads their flagship 20-week high-performance teams apprenticeship program, helping automotive repair shops transform their operations through team-based leadership development. A lifelong resident of Roxbury who started his career as a hands-on mechanic, Shawn balances running his businesses with his commitment to family, including his wife Victoria and 3 daughters, while maintaining a passion for personal development, coaching other shop owners, and community involvement. Hi, Howard and Shawn. Welcome.
Hey, how we doing?
Hi
Thanks,
there.
Chris, for having us today.
Great. Well, that was a mouthful. You're two busy guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with me. Howard, I've read 2 of your books and I've studied the results you've gotten for Fortune 500 clients over the years, and it's all very impressive. But I know that some of our listeners are going to be skeptical, so I have a question to ask you to get things started off. Can you really get these types of results for an automotive repair shop that you've been getting for Fortune 500 companies for decades?
The answer is absolutely. It's predicated, though, on the coachability of the players. No differently than in the large companies. But the main distinction is in the smaller companies. The reality here is that people count more. You don't have a lot of excess bodies lying around. So the question is, can people move from being technically expert in the shop to also exhibiting the behaviors that are required to work in a high performing slash horizontal team? That becomes the question. Not their technical skills, but the ability for them to really shift behaviorally, Chris.
That's a great mindset. It's really a behavioral shift. I think about the way that you worked with Shawn and worked with his shops and the tremendous growth that he's experienced. And Shawn, before we dive in too deeply, can you share a pivotal moment when you realized that the traditional team management and the way that you were doing things in your shop wasn't working?
Man, there's probably a few. I think one pivotal moment that really stood out for me as I was going through the years, doing my best to make sure I'm not needed in the shop and being okay that it's a full-time job sometimes to make sure you're not needed. I had a manager that was really running the show as we were building out our second location. I was actually building my house at the same time. And on a Sunday morning, I got a call from his fiance or girlfriend, soon to be fiance, that he was blue and cold, meaning
Wow.
he wasn't with us anymore. And I just about lost it. At that point, I'm building a second shop. He's helping me get ready to run this thing. And I really had to step back and look at, well, I can't just jump back in and be that guy anymore. And I didn't have the capacity to do so. And that's really, I think, the most pivotal moment where I realized how much and how important some of the tools and things that I've learned from really developing a high performance team at the shop.
Gotcha. Wow, what an impactful story. What would you say is the biggest myth about building high performance teams in automotive repair that you'd like to debunk right now?
The biggest myth. Well, it doesn't happen overnight, that's for sure. And it takes work. And you got to have the right people on the team or on the bus, I would say, right?
Yep,
To make it work.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, ultimately, it always comes down to people come into organizations based on their technical content knowledge, whether it be baking bread, working in an automotive shop, it doesn't really matter. But in the end, It's the technical content that really attracts people. The question is, can you start to move away from that? Not move away from it and not be technical, but can you, let's say, add to that and evolve your game so that you become more three-dimensional than just being a technical expert in something? And that's the case in what we're talking about, because in the automotive world, it attracts people that have a love of the craft, right? I mean, that's
Right.
the game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a perfect segue into my next question. Howard, I've heard you talk, actually, I've heard you talk about this too, as well, Shawn, about unconsciously incompetent and what that means and the continuum of where you go from not knowing all the way up to being very competent. Can you just say a little bit more about that? Because I think that's really important.
Sure. It's the ladder of learning.
Mhm.
And the first step in the ladder where you're unconsciously incompetent is you don't know something, but you don't know that you don't know it. So you think of it a bit like an analogy of like an automobile. Unconscious incompetence would be that I know how to drive an automatic, but I'm not aware that there are stick shifts in the world. And frankly, as today's goes on, it's getting more and more that way.
Right, it is.
The second level is I become consciously incompetent, that I'm aware can drive an automatic transmission, but I'm aware that I don't know how to drive a stick. The third level, which is where I'm consciously competent, is where I can drive a stick, but I have to think about when I depress the clutch, when I let up on the gas, etc. And then finally, the ultimate game is where you're unconsciously competent, where you can drive it and you don't have to think twice about it. But it's a learning curve. And where it becomes uncomfortable for people is that space where they are consciously incompetent to consciously competent, because you are wrestling with it and it's not smooth, it's not easy, it's not natural. So vis-a-vis high-performing teams, what I would venture to say is in most automotive shops, people are unconsciously incompetent. They don't not even aware that there's an alternative universe or another way to play. And
Right.
then our goal is to accelerate them through that process. So eventually it becomes second nature, or it becomes like a new muscle memory. That would be my perspective. Shawn, you want to add to that?
Yeah. And I think that once you understand those steps of learning through those four phases, it really is something that, Howard, you're saying wrestling in those middle two stages is when you may react and lead someone in your shop or business the way that you know not to. And then you have to go back and clean it up immediately. Because if you're not doing that, then you're not showing and exemplifying the traits or the teachings that you're actually looking to put in place and want other people in the organization to emulate. It
Right.
all comes from the top down. If
Absolutely.
I can't clean up when I either react to something or something goes sideways, or I jump in and push somebody out of the way to do it the way I would do it instead of giving them the chance to fall down, to get back up, brush the dust off, and learn from their mistakes. That's really when you can put your focus and attention in those steps of learning, you can really become conscious of training and developing your people in a way that works. Without that being said, it's very difficult. I did it the wrong way until I didn't know what I didn't know showed up. And I was like, oh, wow, check this out. There's a different way to do this.
Yeah, but
And,
just to
it's cool.
piggyback off what Shawn's saying, I would say what's instinctive for any leader who is unconsciously incompetent is there is a screw up in the shop. I, as the leader, have been there and done that. My next step, because that's what I'm paid to do, is go in and fix it. I go in and handle it. But in the end, all you do then is create inadvertently this leader dependency where every time there's a screw up, it's like the monkey's on my back as the leader. So I'm not growing the game. I'm not evolving the team. And so what Shawn referenced in my mind is one of the trickiest things for a lot of these leaders to do is because they are technically strong is to somehow let go and move the game to the next level with the team. That's
Mhm.
tough to do when you are the owner founder.
Yeah, big time.
Right.
Most
Right.
challenging thing I think that I bumped up against myself personally. Letting go and watching it kind of maybe fall down a little bit and not go and
Right.
pick it up right away. It's like,
Right.
when you have kids, I think that changed a bit for me too, right? With the three daughters, when they're small and they fall down and bang their knee, it's like I get that shock through my body. It's like, holy cow. You want
Mhm.
to pick them up, but it's like, dust them off. Hey, it's no big deal. And, you know, it's
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Hey, I love this topic because it's so important. If there is somebody that's at the unconscious incompetent stage, let's see if we can push them a little bit into that conscious incompetent stage. So, what's the real cost of not having a high performance team beyond just the obvious financial impacts?
I personally would say if your team can't function without you there, you pretty much are stuck there. And I think that's one of the biggest, well, it's the biggest dream I had is when I went into business in 2003 on April Fool's Day, it turned into my big joke to myself. Now I got a business and a full-time job and a second job and even a third job.
Right.
And I really was not able to spend the time in the early years with my children, my family. So that used to frustrate me. I'd be aggravated, and then I would react to people not doing what I would expect them to do. And really, it was not having those clear expectations laid out that had me always reacting to what was going on in the shop, that had me see that it was almost impossible to get up and out of the weeds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I've seen so much of this boil down to mindset. Mindset really, it almost dictates where you're going to go and what you will accept and what you will believe. And if you have the right mindset, then you can get there through a combination of strategy and tactics. But if your mindset is gone, you're just going around in an eddy and you're stuck. So you've successfully implemented Fortune 500 team building strategies in independent shops. What's the first thing, Howard, that you would say a shop owner needs to change about their mindset to make this work?
They have to first really create a level of intentionality that that's really what they want to do. To go from being the owner, founder, leader who have been there, done that, and feel like you're best in class, to shifting that I want to create like a brand, I want to evolve the team, which requires that you have coachable players. Having that type of intention is really something that somebody's going to have to really like focus on. If you do create a strong intention, then you're always looking at what's the happy ending? Where do I want to go? So if
Mhm.
I think of my own company, my goal is to have camera ready consultants who can float their own boat in all these different accounts without my intervention.
Sure.
That didn't freeze me. It's no different than if you think about a shop, and let's say if you think about, let's say Shawn as a great example, as he tried to evolve the game with his organization, that has freed him from being the guy who's got to be on the floor, and consequently he can then be outward facing and thinking about how he wants to market the brand, what he wants to do in the community, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not going to happen if somehow you don't extricate yourself from the day to day. And that's the intention of trying to create a high performing team so that it's not leader centric. I mean, ultimately, when you really strip it away, what you're trying to do is create a organization that works horizontally with peers holding peers accountable rather than a leader centric hub and spoke model where everybody keeps coming to you and you become like King Solomon. That's not the game. Even
Right.
though I understand that instinctively it's almost like centrifugal force. So unless people really choose to create a different model of how they want to operate, they're going to instinctively go back to this leader centricity.
Yeah. And there's a side benefit too. There's an ego benefit too. A lot of what we end up doing as owners and founders is we like to solve problems. We're good at solving problems and we get a lot of ego gratification out of that. So I love that it's really about being self-aware and committing to taking that on and making that shift because it's not comfortable, right?
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
And I think even looking at the from the ego perspective is, yeah, when you said earlier, being best in class out of a really good technician, and you can come in, help another tech fix something, and a lot of times without really consciously looking at the impact of how you leave the person feeling when you just come in and solve it. It's almost like they get that sense of I'm not good enough, or I have to come to you when I need something difficult. You're going to solve it for me quickly. And
Right.
it really doesn't work. So, like I said, the conscious effort or the intention to free myself up, really, it was difficult watching somebody struggle with something where I could come down and kind of like push them out of the way, show them how to do it, and really work that more of a guide or coach role as the owner founder to bring these guys up and gals up with the skills that they need to be able to perform. And I look at it now, I want people in my organization that are better at it than I was,
Right.
or definitely better
Right.
at it than I am now.
But
Right.
that
Never
actually, but
stuff
you
I don't
know,
even know. take it out. It's like, I want to
But
create people that are way better at doing that than I was. And that's something that I think really stands out in our culture. It's like, I'm growing other people to be the best they can be,
Yeah.
period.
yeah,
Yeah.
but what that presumes, and it's a key point. It means that in order to create a high performance culture, it requires a leader who's okay. I mean, you got to be okay because if you can't let go of control and your ego is such that you've got to be the answer person, you're not going to be able to create a high performance organization.
No way.
So I
No.
say, so
No.
to me, when I think about the admission price, one is you got to have a client, right? You got to have a client whose head is on straight. And the second is you got to have players that are coachable at least. That's ground zero.
Fantastic. I think a lot about what Steve Jobs said. He said, we want to hire the best people and we want to get out of their way. In order to be a good leader, that's really the mindset that you have to take. And this is really present in my mind because I had a conversation a couple weeks back with the shop owner. And it was funny because I know some people who know this shop owner, and we were talking, and the subject came up. And it was interesting because what he really needs to do to move his business forward is he needs to hire a technician and he needs to get that handled. But that's such an onerous task in his mind that he keeps shying away from it. And now he's talking about going back and getting more certifications. And he's had these conversations with his wife, and his wife is like, honey, you're not going to grow the shop until you hire another tech. And now he's talking about going out and getting better as a technician. He's getting stuck in the Michael Gerber E-myth. He's the technician that's doing it. So it's a very subtle shift, but a profound shift. So thank you so much for your insights on that. I think it's very important. Shawn, you told us a little bit about what it was like working with these tools and strategies in your shop. Can you give us a specific example where applying these strategies into your shop has transformed your shop's culture?
Well, and I don't think there's one specific. I think it's really the conglomerate of all of it in almost in a way that kind of coincides with the steps of learning, let's say, like
Mhm.
right from the basics of listening and how to assert in a conversation or managing conflict when it's in the organization versus then how to shift your communication between players where members aren't feeling attacked or they're pointing fingers at each other and things like that when it's really walking through. And I think the active learning model that we put together that we've been through the 20-week session you're talking about,
Hmm.
there's a week of lessons and then a week of learning and going back and like coaching through the learnings from the prior week. So we get to exercise the muscles and have people come back and share with us how was it when you went to try to have the conversation. We use real live issues that are going on in these people's shops and them sharing with each other in that environment has everybody else benefit from gaining the knowledge on what it was like for somebody else, and it makes it more transformational, I believe.
Yep.
One key thing that really landed that if I had taken it on sooner or with a little more velocity or intention to push was having your people understand each other's personality types. There's so many different types of personality slash profile tests you can take out there, like the disc analysis or Myers-Briggs or any of those that really get your team almost engaged in playing. So understanding that you have people in the organization that operate and they got that high level of like dominance or they got a drive behind them versus the people that need to know everything about everything and all the little minute details that would drive somebody else with a different personality nuts, and having them all be able to understand and communicate on a level like the ways you communicate with one person is not the other. Like situational leadership is really what it is, and that's where the anchor is, understanding each other and then playing with the tools to communicate differently or when a conflict comes up to really be able to recognize where it's coming from, because 9 times out of 10 it's not coming from what's going on in the shop. It's coming from something that that person has as part of who they are,
Hmm.
conflicting with somebody else that sees things totally different. And until they can come together, understand what that is and how that works, it's really difficult to move the needle.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And you said something a little bit earlier about the active learning model. And I think this is really important too, because I've spoken with a lot of GMs, a lot of shop owners, and they say, you know what? I spent a few grand. I sent my employees to get trained, and they came back, and it was like they didn't learn anything. Nothing changed, nothing happened. And just the fact that you're actually working with real world problems that are happening right now in the shop, and you're working through those at the same time that they're going through the training, I think is really important. So that's
I think
something that
we,
really helps.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think we all experience that. You go out and get some training, and for the first couple weeks back, everything's like kicking butt, and you're like, holy
You're
cow, they
fired
learned
up.
a lot, and it just like
Yeah.
trickles down and back to the same old thing, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is cool to watch people develop and work out. It's almost like going to the gym. So, and then it goes deeper beyond that. But this really sets the groundwork for what it takes to be a high performance team.
Yeah. What would you say is the most surprising result that you've seen when the shop fully commits to the approach?
Well, there's quite a few that had some really spectacular results. I think one of the best ones that I could say is an owner being able to actually step back and realize that he can trust his team to lead. And that's what they've wanted all along, but he was stuck. He
Yeah.
was really kind of keeping himself in the center of that spoke.
Hmm.
And
Right.
for an owner or founder to see there's actually an opportunity, that was where for him specifically, that unconscious incompetence of getting himself out of the way. Here's an owner that wants to put a succession plan in place and sell his shop in the next few years, is like looking at, well, now that I don't have to be there and a part of it, maybe I'll open up a second one and have it for another 10 years. And it's kind of like it shifted the game, because I think it allows us as owners, founders, wanted to get up and out of the business, to have the business operate and be our cash machine, let's call it, right? Because
Hmm.
when it's operating well, that's what it's going to do.
Well, that's ultimately part and parcel of the shift of going hierarchically when I'm the leader, I'm the answer person, to going to a horizontal game where it's peers holding peers accountable in the shop. If there are issues that are there between individuals, rather than me having to come in and interject and play dad or mom, they're sorting it out among themselves. So ultimately, if it really works the way it's supposed to work, you extricate the leader, and so there's less dependency, less need for supervision, and people are floating their own boat. And then
Right.
the good news for them is that they then feel a greater sense of ownership, and
Hmm.
psychologically they feel more empowered.
Yep.
So it is a win-win. Everybody does win, but it does require a higher degree of accountability. That's the price you pay. If you want to work in a high performance organization, the good news is you're more empowered, you have more impact, and the price you pay is you got to be more accountable. That's what it comes down to.
And it really
Gotcha.
does boil down to that. During those active learning models, dealing with conflict when they come up in real life, and how to go back and have those conversations. And sometimes you just got to come in and retool them with where the conversation went sideways, and be willing to step back in, but not solve the problem, coach them into solving the problem. There's a thing we call triangulation, when somebody comes to me and wants me to go over there and smack the other person for doing something to this person. And then it's like a rotating wheel. You put yourself in a totally different spot, right? As
Right.
opposed to, come to me, let me send you back with some things to try and work it out yourself, and then come back and give me the feedback. So
Right.
you really got to want to put yourself back into the teacher model or teacher mode, coach mode,
Hmm.
to make this.
Right. Sure. Being coachable. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I hear a lot is about the bickering between the front of the house and the back of the house. Specifically, how does this process or does this process help with that, making a more cohesive team?
I think the main thing that I could really put an exclamation point on is it gives them the tools to deal with conflict, whether it be, hey, you ordered the wrong parts, or hey, my labor time was wrong, or hey, this one's going to be more, and the writer's got to call the customer back and say, hey, it's going to cost you more. That's the worst place for a technician to put a service advisor in, to call the customer and ask for more money because the tech didn't catch the rust, let's say, on the job, or proactively look ahead and say, hey, there could be a situation here, so
Hmm.
that it's dealt with. And for them to be able to have real conversations on what it's like for the tech to have to deal with that, or what it's like for the advisor to have that conversation with the client, for them to be able to understand each other and how to pull together tighter as a team. I think that absolutely is probably the best thing that can happen, let alone holding each other accountable to really good inspections, or hey, why didn't you sell the work on that car, like what's the deal? So it's like a push pull,
Yeah.
tug of war without the fight, let's say. And for them to really be able to work together, communicate, and always pushing for the growth and the benefit of the organization as a whole. What's
Yeah.
going to make the organization better? Not you're going to get your hours or you're going to get your commissions, right? Like how can we push them all up together? And it
Yeah.
really lays the foundation for those type of conversations to happen.
This really reminds me of something that can be a real problem. And the real problem is a shop owner says, you know what, I don't have time for team building. Or it's that touchy-feely kind of stuff. I'm too busy putting out fires in order to do this. What would you
Yeah.
tell someone like that?
Well, you're going to pay one way or the other. If you choose to feel like there are too many fires, and consequently, I don't have the time to evolve my own game or my players, I'm going to be stuck firefighting continually. Versus what we're talking about, and in fact, it's really an important distinction. We're not talking about team building exercises of trust fall, people doing like kumbaya stuff. That's not what this is about on any way, shape, or form. What this is about when we're talking about creating a high performance team, we're talking about clarifying the priorities, clarifying roles, clarifying accountabilities, creating best in class ways of working, high level of interdependencies. We're talking about like very pragmatic stuff here. So this is no one walks away thinking that was touchy feely, blah, blah, blah. It's not the game we're playing. So I think it's really important to recognize the distinction that the old paradigm of team building like exercises is not that. Now, psychologically, there is a byproduct that you will create a greater level of relationship, which is what you want to do. But the goal here is how do we move this game ahead from a business standpoint? Everything flows from that. And so I think it's important people get that, which is one of the reasons why it works. Because frankly, if you were taking shop owners to take their people and themselves out of the shop and they're doing like BS activities, I mean, they're not going to come back. That's not
Trust
the
falls.
game. And it
Right.
sounds like, yeah, trustful. That's not going to happen. And frankly, that's the only reason we work in these major corporations. They're not going to pay the freight to do something like that. Those
Yeah.
days are long gone.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about emotional intelligence, and that is the misconception of emotional intelligence. I love how you're talking about, no, this is pragmatic. This is the most pragmatic thing that you can do. And it works in technically focused environments the same way it works in knowledge working environments. It's the same thing. And there is a byproduct that is bringing the team together and having them take accountability. I think that's a big part of it is accountability and then feeling like they're building something together. One of the biggest frustrations as business owners that we all have is getting our employees to take accountability and treat the business as if it were their business, right? Because decisions and behavior is different when it is my business, when I'm participating in the benefits of it and I care for my team members and I want to make sure that these things are working. So that's a big, big part of the whole equation as well. So what would you say the connection is between building a high performance team and becoming an absentee owner? How does one lead to the other?
Yeah, well, I think really what you're doing is you're creating same thing, those accountabilities where everybody in the organization is holding each other accountable to a higher standard.
Mhm.
Howard said earlier, having those clear roles and goals, the clear defined responsibilities of each person. And when somebody's not operating and following the protocol, they get called out without the owner having to come in and say something. So from that context, having the freedom, whether you want to be an absentee owner or not, it's not really what I'm chasing, but I love being a coach to my players. And you almost kind of look at it like a sports analogy. Like you got the guys down on the field throwing the ball back and forth or fixing the cars. Then you got the coaches on the sidelines, which are really the management of the business,
Mhm.
kind of keeping them in line. And you could sit up in the skybox and watch your team perform.
Yeah.
That's more of like where I really see myself watching the organization continue to grow and develop. And we have losses. Shit happens,
Mhm.
right? And we learn from it. And I think when you give people the opportunity to learn from it, they really want to perform. And I think one of the most important things to really have people own their roles and own their position in an organization is they have some kind of compensated stake in the game. How do we get this shop to a certain level? And what do we get for it? Because if people aren't paid on a performance based, some kind of result for being that top level ability of performance and efficiency and taking care of the clients as they come through the door, that raises the whole elevation of watching people play. It's like you watch football, it's not just we play one game and the season's over. No, they're fighting all season long to get to the playoffs. Then you get to the playoffs, which would be like the quarter. or you get the 4 quarters in the year, and then you get to the Super Bowl, and then you want to win the Super Bowl. It's like having a strategically planned out compensation plan for your team where they get it and it's simple. I share our income statement with our entire staff, both organizations. And for them to have an eyeball or a line of sight and to see the performance of the company itself, it really goes a long way. And I know that's hard for some people to want to share.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's one other distinction that's important, though, because it's funny when I heard the term absentee owner, I kind of bristled a little bit. The distinction that I would make is that abdication, hoping things work out. I'm in the Bahamas. That's not the game. This is more about a game of delegation. So abdication would be delegation without milestones. So you're still in the game here. But the reality here is going back to what Shawn said, you're coaching, you're trying to create the scenarios whereby people float their own boat. But you're literally still in the game. So this is not a game of abdication, it's a game of delegation, but in a very pointed manner, so that you look at what's the best way for me to really leverage my time as the leader, and the goal being to try to have these folks keep evolving so I don't have to get involved in the minutia.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to think about that. What is your business intended to do for you? How does your business fit into your life? I think is a big one. And you don't want to get roped into a lot of the things that you don't want to do and that you're not good at. That's a recipe for disaster for any business owner, I think. So just making sure, and every shop owner I talk to is thinking about this. What happens at the end of the day? Are you going to sell this business? Is it saleable? Is it something where you are going to earn yourself out? Are you going to sell it to your employees? Are you going to sell it to a private equity firm and have them roll it up? What are you going to do? And these are all considerations that are going to factor directly into this and what you end up doing. In terms of timelines, if somebody's sitting here and saying, you know what, I really need to get my teams organized and structured, what's the timeline for really making a deep impact into your shop's culture using this system?
I'll tell you, watching the shops that have gone through the last 20-week sessions we had, it really does depend, Howard, you said earlier, on the coachability of the players. And there was a couple shops that just like it shifted the whole game in their organization. And you're watching the efficiency go up. You're watching the owner be able to free himself up. And there was two of them specifically. The owner wasn't really engaged and wasn't showing up to every meeting, and definitely wasn't showing up for the sessions where we were going over the skills from the prior week, that active learning model. And I don't think it really bit into it. And like you can't just take the material that you get in the program and go do it yourself. It really needs some intervention and some practice. And if you're not practicing and playing on the field, it's like thinking you're going to get better at football by sitting on the bench.
Right.
It doesn't work. You got to get on the court, you got to play, and you got to take the bruises as they come. Because I'll tell you, this isn't like come in and get fixed. This is come in, work your ass off, and make a difference in your company.
Yeah.
You really got to put the work in. We saw a tremendous difference in those 20 weeks. And looking beyond that, there's also coaching available for when you bump up against issues or situations that need a little bit of help, right? So it's not just like a one and done thing. I think when you said earlier, those opportunities where you go send your people to training, they go out for a weekend, get some skills, they come back, they use them, and they fall off. It's going to happen if you're not practicing. And I think that's what the most important part is, really keeping the owner and or the leadership team engaged in the practices, right? You got to practice what you're learning, and you got to use it, and you got to show up. You got to emulate what you want to see in your people below. Because if you're not doing it and you think they're going to do it without you, that ain't going to work either. And like I said, back to, how fast can you do it? How committed are you? And how much are you really going to put into having the shop show up? And I think, Chris, you made a good point. If you don't have a vision or an idea on what you want your business to do for you, that's definitely an exercise that needs to be hammered out. And it might not be clear. You might have that 10-year thing, but one of the things I believe is you always want to operate your business as if it's going to be for sale, so that you can continue to make it as valuable as you possibly can, whether you sell it or not.
Yeah. And you have the most options when you do that.
Totally, most options. And my specific shop, I have two people that work there. That succession plan, 7-8 years from now, they're going to be taking it over. And we're already starting to line that up now. So you want that extra buy-in, you want that out down the road, you really want to free yourself up. If you don't have people in your organization that really want to continue to roll it over and keep it alive, well, however you want to look at it, that's the way that I'm looking at my specific organization. And, you can do anything with it.
Yeah, I think one other important point in terms of what is provided to these shops is what Shawn articulated was like this 20-week action learning model, which is more around skills based and then application. Another distinction is around actually doing an alignment and working with the group itself on live issues, where you actually collect input, you get a lay of the land, and then you actually drive right there. And then the third point that Shawn mentioned was around coaching. So that's the gamut of what would be provided: skills, alignment of the team itself, and/or coaching. But what I would say, honestly, is that to work with a team, they should be seeing things shifting quickly. This is not like you're giving birth and 9 months later you hope to see something. It's like the goal right off the bat is you're making an impact right off the bat. Now, the reality is, and many times clients will say this to me, how long will it take for us to be a high-performing team? And I'll say that if we're collecting data and assessing the team, usually the fastest I ever see a team actually be able to self-assess that way is maybe like 18 months. But it's not like you're waiting for 18 months for the sky to open up. You're shifting the game dramatically because there's always going to be low-hanging fruit. There's always going to be issues between the front of the shop and the back of the shop. You're always going to have issues around role confusion or accountabilities. There's going to be trust issues. There's always low-hanging fruit. So the goal is to attack that stuff quickly and start to shift the game right off the bat.
Yep.
But it's really important to recognize that this is not something we're going to have to wait a long time for an ROI.
Gotcha. So if a shop owner is listening right now and feeling overwhelmed, what's the single most important thing that they can do? How do they get in touch with you, and what's the process?
Well, they can go to magicalsolutionsgroup.com. We actually have a survey there that you could fill out and schedule a half-hour debrief call. And from that point, we can really kind of get an idea on what you're dealing with and guide you in the right direction.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to anybody out there that's experiencing some frustration? Any final words you'd like to impart upon them?
Well, don't do what I did and wait till you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. If you know that this sounds like something that could make a shift or a difference in your culture or team, let's have a call. Let's figure it out and see what we can do to help you.
Yeah, that's what I would say, that there's no downside here. The only question is how quickly will it take you to move the game ahead? But what's the alternative? I mean, what else are you going to do? So if in the end, if you're really invested in moving your business and you're invested in really shifting the way that you run it, and you really have a genuine intentionality to take the game up, this is the fastest way to move it ahead. This is not about reading a book. It's not like watching a video or listening to tapes in your car. This is really about doing the work. And as Shawn said earlier, you're right on the field moving this game ahead. So my feeling, honestly, is that if people are serious, reach out, have a conversation, and there will absolutely be no chance that nothing will happen. Something will always happen. It's a question then of whether or not you have the players, the intention, and yourself as the leader. But this would probably be the best investment you can make if you really have a strong need and desire to move your game to the next level.
Howard, thank you,
Just a plug
Shawn.
for Technician Fine, I was going to say finding the right players. Thank you, Chris, for making that possible.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Yeah,
It always
do it.
makes it easier when you've got a shop that's running with strong leadership and that's running the correct way. It makes my job a lot easier to help you find techs.
I'm
So
sure.
thank you so much, Howard. Thank you so much, Shawn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
It's been fun. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.